Now, to help us break down the latest developments on North Korea, we have with us Dr. Bong Young-shik from the Yonsei Institute for North Korean Studies. It's good to have you back on the show.
Pleased to be here.
So, President Moon has arrived in Europe to take a part in this week-long trip, and he has brought a message with him. As we just heard in that report, President Moon held an interview with the Figaro newspaper, where he called on the international community to respond to North Korea's denuclearization pledges and show them that, Kim is on the right track. What is your takeaway from this interview piece?
Well, we have to take his interview as it is. He said that the European Union, just like the rest of the world, including South Korea, must be ready to respond positively to the pledges made by North Korean leadership for making different strategic decisions away from the development and maintenance of nuclear weapons and long-range missiles. But the problem here is that the European Union, just like any other countries, are only ready to respond to pledges of North Korea by pledges of prosperity and embracement of North Korea as a new member of the peace-loving international community. So the ball is still in the court of North Korea to verify that North Korea's pledges can be trusted. But unfortunately, North Korean leadership has failed to have provided concrete evidence that North Korea's pledges can be trusted.
So on Monday as well, President Moon will be meeting with the French President Emmanuel Macron, and there is much speculation about what President Moon will say to Macron, especially because France is one of the permanent member states of the United Nations Security Council, and the question is, what is he going to talk about concerning the UN sanctions on North Korea? Do you think there's going to be any drive towards perhaps suggesting that an easing of sanctions on North Korea, as some have speculated?
I think so. Compared to the United States and Japan, countries that have maintained very firm stance on continuous economic pressure on North Korea for the purpose of denuclearization of North Korea, and South Korean government's position has been more flexible, that improvement of the economic cooperation and additional engagement with North Korea would further incentivize the North Korean leadership to move in the direction of gradual but eventually complete denuclearization in the end. So there is a slight but real fissure in how to look at North Korean leadership's determination of denuclearization between South Korean government and the governments of the United States and Japan. And I think it is a purpose of President Moon Jae-in during his visit to European countries to persuade European governments to support South Korean government's position that, listen, I can assure you that through third summit meeting with the top leadership of North Korea, I realize and I can guarantee to you that North Korean leadership has made a strategic decision to abandon nuclear weapons and long-range missiles if there will be a security guarantee and just focus on economic development. But the United States and Japan argue that there has been a word delivered by the South Korean government and through a special envoy and the president himself, but there has not been assurance directly and firmly made by North Korean leadership itself. So unless there will be direct confirmation by supreme leadership of North Korea, it is premature for the rest of the world to ease economic sanctions, which has been the major reason for North Korean leadership to stop nuclear and missile tests and agree with other countries for peaceful negotiations. I think European countries' position are closer to that of the United States and Japan than that of South Korea or that of China and Russia, that it is premature for the international community to give too much trust in North Korean leadership and begin to ease economic sanctions. Because European countries are really emphatic on a lot of issues, but especially with regard to human rights and denuclearization. And North Korea's human rights violations are well known to the rest of the world, and European Union has been the pioneering force, especially in the United Nations, to criticize and condemn the abhorrent record of human rights violations by North Korean leadership. The United Nations actually sponsored the publication and adoption of Commission of Inquiry that detailed the cases of the human rights violation inside North Korea under the previous and the current leadership. And so the United Nations position is very firm that North Korea's human rights violations are not just accidental cases, but pervasive yet systematic. So it's not like the human rights violations that take place in the case of a civil war, like the Syrian civil war, but it's a systematic, pervasive, so that the regime is primarily responsible for continuous violation of human rights. And the European countries have been the major countries, member countries in the United Nations to pass the resolutions to condemn human rights record of North Korea. So it'll be very difficult for South Korean president to say that human rights conditions inside North Korea has been improving and will be improved without seeing the concrete evidence of real effort by the leadership. And European countries are also very vocal in terms of keeping the world free of nuclear weapons if possible. So if North Korean leadership is criticized, if North Korea criticizes the United States as for its gangster-like behavior, the condemnation rendered to the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo after his visit to North Korea, then as he said that as a member of P5 in the United Nations Security Council that unanimously passed series of the resolutions on North Korea because of North Korea's missile nuclear test, then France, as a member of P5 of the UN Security Council, will be also categorized as gangster.
But, okay, so President Moon's argument would be that he needs to, the argument is we need to befriend North Korea at this certain time, with this strategy. That's the only way to get North Korea to denuclearize. So do you think he'll be able to convince them of this at all in any little way?
No, as I said, that if North Korea made a pledge that it has abandoned nuclear weapons and missiles for the sake of choosing the path toward the prosperity and economic development, if the pledge is real and genuine, then the rest of the world is ready to embrace North Korea and incentivize North Korea to continuously move that direction. The problem is that unfortunately, despite the explanations given by the South Korean government, the rest of the world do not really see that there has been enough and verifiable evidence that North Korea's leadership has indeed made that strategic decision. And think about it, the North Korea leadership making that strategic decision has not been publicly, openly announced by the North Korean government itself. It has been only announced by South Korean government. So, in order for North Korean leadership to make sure the rest of the world would accept and believe its pledge in favor of economic development away from nuclear weapons, then it is time for Kim Jong-un leadership to actually make the official announcement.
Right. In the meantime, South Korea and North Korea have held high-level talks at Panmunjom today. The results came out just earlier, saying various incremental agreements have been made. So if I go over it briefly, they agreed to further military talks to implement the military agreement reached last month. They agreed for Red Cross talks for further separated family reunion events and activities. But the one that catches the eye most of all is, of course, they agreed to have a groundbreaking ceremony to connect the rail and road networks by the end of November or early December. That's the groundbreaking ceremony. What do you make of this new agreements that have been reached between the two Koreas?
Well, they can make a lot of initial ceremonies for potential joint ventures between the two, regimes. But as long as there remain economic sanctions, like UN Security Council resolutions 2371 and 2375 that prohibits joint ventures or reconnecting railroad systems inside North Korea, then all these effort for inter-Korean economic cooperation will not go very far. Because if South Korean government is going ahead with these plans, despite very clear warnings from the United States. You remember the U.S. President Donald Trump uses the controversial phrase, without our approval, then South Koreans cannot do anything. Approval 3 times, which has been reported in South Korea as a potential, like a slap in the face, considering the diplomatic decorum. But that shows how firm the stance of the United States is, as long as continuing, economic pressure, unless North Korea is coming out with more concrete steps for denuclearization. So the point to watch is how far South Korean government would go, despite all these clear warnings issued by the United States, for the sake of creating additional momentum in the inter-Korean economic cooperation. And my personal view is that it'll be too risky for South Korean government.
Another development as well, that's the U.S. continues to ramp up pressure on North Korea, with the Treasury Department adding a list of so-called secondary boycott risk to North Korea sanctions. What is this exactly, and how does it affect the situation with North Korea?
Basically, there's a long list of North Korean companies and individuals, about 310, designated by the Treasury Department of United States government, that if you do business with these entities, then you will be subject to the punishment of the secondary boycott. That the company or the individuals doing business with one of these listed entities will not be able to do business with American companies or banks. So it's kind of an indirect warning to North Korean government that there wouldn't be any stealthy sidestepping of economic sanctions in place. And this is another way of warning other countries as well, like China and South Korea, that you have to abide by the UN Security Council resolutions until there will be discernible progress on the front of denuclearization of North Korea.
So while the U.S. is making these warnings, but there's still talk of a second, summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, and even the John Bolton, the U.S. security advisor, has said that it could be happening, or should be happening in the next couple of months or so. So despite these warnings, it still seems to be on track. Do you think?
Right. I mean, even the White House confirmed that there would be a second summit meeting between DPRK, Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, and the United States. But it depends on, what kind of meeting it's going to be. I mean, I can have a lot of meetings with my father, but, some meetings I would like to avoid, right? Some meeting I would welcome. The Singapore summit meeting was a different one because it was a historical one. For the first time, the adversary agreed to meet at the highest levels of the government to talk about subjects, which is peace building and potential normalization of relations and the complete denuclearization of North Korea, which have been kind of tabooed in either of the countries. So it was a groundbreaking moment and very necessary for both sides to probe the genuine intention of the other side. But the second summit meeting will be a very different character. It will be potentially U.S. government going after the leadership of North Korea about the specific schedule and conditions of the denuclearization. And there could be a kind of United States giving the last opportunity for North Korean leadership to come out clean. So there is no reason to believe that North Koreans would just happily be waiting for the second summit meeting to take place as soon as possible. The content, expected content of the meeting is more important than having the second summit meeting itself.
Well, we'll have to also wait to see whether it happens this year as promised or not. Thank you for coming in and sharing us your insights.
You're welcome.